The quiet storm. The morning shift on Station Prometheus began like any other, with the gentle hum of artificial gravity generators and the soft blue glow of the navigation lights painting the corridors in ethereal shadows. Marcus Reed adjusted his tool belt as he walked toward the engineering bay, his boots creating a rhythmic echo against the polished metal flooring. 3 years of working on this deep space research station had made these early hours feel like home, though he still missed the unpredictable sunrises of Earth. "You're 17 minutes early again," came a voice that always managed to make Marcus pause mid-step. Nyx Voidheart emerged from behind a massive fuel conduit, her violet skin gleaming under the artificial lights. Her silver eyes, large and luminous in the way of her people, regarded him with what he'd learned to recognize as amusement. The Xerian alien stood nearly a foot taller than Marcus, her lithe frame moving with an otherworldly grace that never failed to captivate him. "Someone has to keep you company during the boring parts," Marcus replied, setting down his diagnostic equipment. Over the past 8 months, their partnership had evolved from cautious professionalism to something resembling friendship, though Marcus often wondered if he truly understood the depths of Nyx's thoughts. Nyx's people, the Xerians, were known throughout the galaxy for their technological prowess and emotional restraint. They communicated primarily through subtle changes in their bioluminescent skin patterns, making them difficult for other species to read. Nyx, however, had made an effort to adapt to human expressions, though her smiles always seemed carefully constructed, as if she were translating her feelings through multiple languages. "The primary coolant systems show minor fluctuations," Nyx reported, her voice carrying the musical quality common to her species. "Nothing critical, but worth monitoring." As they worked side by side, checking connections and running diagnostics, Marcus found himself stealing glances at his alien colleague. There was something different about Nyx today, a tension in her movements, a brightness to her skin that seemed more intense than usual. Among Xerians, such changes could indicate anything from excitement to anxiety, and Marcus had never quite mastered reading the subtle differences. "You know," Marcus said, adjusting a stubborn coupling, "this reminds me of my old job back on Earth. I used to work with this brilliant engineer named Jasmine Torres. She could spot a faulty connection from across the room just like you do." The effect of his words was immediate and startling. Nyx's skin shifted from its usual soft violet to a deep, almost purple hue, and her movements became sharp, mechanical. The air around them seemed to crackle with an energy Marcus had never experienced before. "Jasmine," Nyx repeated, the name sounding strange in her melodic voice. "She was important to you." Something in her tone made Marcus pause his work entirely. "We were colleagues, good friends actually. She taught me most of what I know about quantum fuel systems before I transferred here." Nyx's silver eyes fixed on him with an intensity that made Marcus uncomfortable. For a moment he could have sworn he saw something raw and vulnerable flash across her features, but it disappeared so quickly he wondered if he'd imagined it. "I see," Nyx said, her voice suddenly flat and emotionless. She stood abruptly, gathering her tools with jerky, uncharacteristic movements. "I must attend to other duties." Before Marcus could respond, she was gone, leaving behind only the faint scent of ozone and the lingering impression that he had somehow crossed an invisible line he didn't even know existed. The engineering bay felt hollow without her presence, and Marcus found himself staring at the spot where she'd been standing, wondering what he'd done wrong and why the mention of an old friend had caused such a dramatic reaction. Outside in the corridor, he could hear the rapid footsteps of Nyx's departure, but something in the rhythm suggested she wasn't walking. She was running, sparks and shattered metal. The alarms began wailing 23 minutes after Nyx had stormed out of the engineering bay. Marcus was still puzzling over their strange interaction when the station's emergency klaxons shattered the relative quiet of his workday. Red warning lights bathed the corridors in an ominous glow as automated voices announced a Level 3 containment breach in Sector 7, the main fuel distribution center. Marcus dropped his plasma welder and ran toward the emergency, his heart pounding, with a dread that had nothing to do with standard protocol. Sector 7 was Nix's secondary assignment area, the place she often retreated to when she needed space to think. As he rounded the corner leading to the fuel center, the acrid smell of burning metal and ozone filled his nostrils. The sight that greeted him defied comprehension. The massive fuel distribution hub, a marvel of Xerian engineering that had operated flawlessly for over a decade, was completely destroyed. Twisted metal beams jutted from what had once been precision-calibrated fuel lines. The main processing unit, a crystalline structure the size of a small transport pod, lay in glittering fragments across the deck. Coolant fluid mixed with rainbow-colored fuel additives created an otherworldly pool that reflected the emergency lights like a fractured aurora. "By the void," breathed Chief Engineer Korath, a gruff Tellarite who rarely showed emotion. What kind of explosive device could cause this level of destruction? Marcus said nothing, but his eyes found what he was looking for and dreading. Scattered around the wreckage were small patches of violet residue, the telltale sign of Xerion bioenergy discharge. Only extreme emotional distress could cause a Xerion to lose control of their natural energy fields so completely. Captain Rodriguez arrived with the emergency response team, her dark eyes scanning the devastation with military precision. "Any casualties?" "None reported," replied Lieutenant Chen, consulting his tablet. Whoever did this waited until the area was clear of personnel. "This wasn't an attack," Marcus said quietly, then louder when the captain turned to him. "This was personal." Before anyone could question him further, a shadow moved at the far end of the corridor. Nix stepped into view, and Marcus barely recognized her. Her usually pristine uniform was torn and stained with fuel residue. Her violet skin had darkened to an almost black purple, and her silver eyes blazed with an inner fire that seemed to illuminate her face from within. Most shocking of all were her hands. They were crackling with barely contained bioelectric energy, small arcs of silver lightning dancing between her fingers. "Nix," Marcus called out, taking a step toward her. Despite the dangerous energy surrounding her form, she looked at him, and for a moment her expression crumbled into something raw and broken. I didn't mean for it to be so." She gestured helplessly at the destruction around them. Captain Rodriguez moved to intercept, her hand moving instinctively toward her sidearm. "Engineer Voidheart, you're confined to quarters pending investigation." No." The word came out as a low growl, and the bioelectric discharge around Nix intensified. Several nearby crew members stepped back involuntarily. Marcus ignored the danger and moved closer. "Nix, what happened? Why did you—" Her silver eyes locked onto his, and in them he saw a storm of emotions he couldn't begin to understand. Pain, confusion, something that might have been jealousy, and underneath it all a desperate vulnerability that made his chest tight. "You wouldn't understand," she whispered, her voice barely audible over the continuing alarms. "Humans love so easily, so carelessly. You speak of this, Jasmine, as if—" She shook her head violently. "My people don't. We aren't supposed to." The energy around her hands flared suddenly, and she pressed them against her temples as if trying to contain something threatening to burst free. Marcus took another step forward, close enough now that he could feel the heat radiating from her bioelectric field. "Then help me understand." Beneath the surface 3 cycles ago, Xerion Prime. The memory crystal hummed softly as Nix's consciousness drifted back to her homeworld, a place of stark beauty where silver cities rose like geometric flowers from crystalline deserts. She had been among the youngest Xerians ever selected for off-world assignment, chosen not despite her emotional volatility, but because of it. The collective had deemed her interesting anomaly, a phrase that had followed her like a shadow throughout her formative years. Emotional attachment is inefficiency, her mentor Elder Thane had instructed during her final preparation sessions. You will encounter species that mistake temporary chemical reactions for something meaningful. Do not be contaminated by their weakness. Nix had nodded, her skin displaying the cool blue patterns of understanding and compliance. She had believed then that she was different from other Xerians only in her curiosity about alien cultures. The possibility that she might be capable of the very emotions her people had evolved beyond seemed impossible. Present time, Station Prometheus. The memory faded as Marcus's voice brought her back to the destroyed fuel center. The emergency teams had established a perimeter, but Marcus remained close, his brown eyes fixed on her with a mixture of concern and determination that made her chest constrict in unfamiliar ways. "Nix," Captain Rodriguez called from behind the safety barrier. "We need to discuss what happened here." But Marcus held up a hand, never breaking eye contact with her. "Give us a moment, Captain. Please." The human captain hesitated, clearly torn, between protocol and intuition. Finally, she nodded. 5 minutes, then we need answers." As the emergency teams retreated to a respectful distance, Marcus stepped even closer. The bioelectric energy around Nix's hands flickered uncertainly, responding to her internal conflict. "On my world," Nix began, her voice barely above a whisper, "we are taught that emotions are evolutionary remnants, primitive responses that weaken judgment and efficiency. The collective identified individuals like me generations ago, Xerians, who retained the capacity for what you might call feelings, and gradually bred the trait away." Marcus listened without interruption, his face reflecting a growing understanding. "But I am not like other Xerians," she continued, her skin shifting through deep purples and blacks. "I was born with what my people consider a genetic deficiency. I can feel anger, curiosity, even," she struggled with the word, "affection. The collective studies me, Marcus. I am their laboratory specimen, sent here to observe and report on emotional species while they monitor my own aberrant responses." The confession hung between them like a bridge neither was sure they should cross. "When you spoke of Jasmine," Nix's voice cracked slightly, "something inside me ignited. A possessiveness I didn't understand, a pain that had no logical source. In that moment I felt what I believe you humans call jealousy, and it was so overwhelming that I—" She gestured at the wreckage around them. Marcus absorbed this revelation, his engineering mind working to process the implications. "So you're saying your people sent you here specifically because you're different? Because you can feel things they can't, cannot, and do not wish to," Nix corrected. "They view emotions as we might view a disease, something to be studied, understood, and ultimately eliminated. But that means—" Marcus paused, the full weight of her situation becoming clear. "You're completely alone in this. You're experiencing feelings you've never been taught to handle, surrounded by people who either can't understand them or see them as flaws to be corrected." Nix's bioelectric field flickered and dimmed as his words hit their mark. For the first time since he'd known her, she looked truly vulnerable. Not the carefully controlled alien diplomat or the efficient engineer, but someone lost and frightened by her own inner landscape. "The worst part," she admitted, "is that I don't want them to stop. These feelings, even the painful ones, make everything more vivid, more real. When I work beside you, when you laugh at something I've said, when you trust me with complex problems, I feel alive in ways my people would consider pathological." Marcus reached out slowly, telegraphing his movement so she could retreat if needed. When she didn't pull away, he gently took one of her hands. The bioelectric energy didn't harm him. Instead, it felt warm, tingly, like touching a live wire that somehow knew not to hurt him. "Maybe," he said softly, "being different isn't the same as being broken." Breaking barriers, the observation deck of Station Prometheus offered a breathtaking view of the Andromeda Nebula, its swirling clouds of pink and gold gas creating a cosmic tapestry that had inspired countless poets and philosophers. Marcus had suggested they meet here after the station's crisis teams had finished their initial assessment of the fuel center damage. The informal hearing could wait until tomorrow. Tonight, he wanted to understand the woman who had literally torn apart a piece of advanced technology with her bare emotions. Nix stood at the vast transparasteel window, her reflection ghost-like against the stellar backdrop. She had changed from her damaged uniform into civilian clothes, a simple gray tunic that somehow made her seem more alien and more human simultaneously. Her skin had settled into a soft lavender hue, calmer than before but still crackling occasionally with residual energy. "I've been thinking about what you said," Marcus began, settling onto one of the observation benches. "About being studied by your people. The collective maintains detailed records of my responses to various stimuli," Nix replied without turning from the window. "They know about our conversations, our work partnership. They probably predicted this emotional episode, to within a few percentage points." Marcus felt a chill that had nothing to do with the station's climate control. "Are you saying they wanted this to happen?" "Not wanted exactly, but they are curious about the intersection of Zarian emotional capacity and sustained contact with humans." She finally turned to face him, her silver eyes reflecting the nebula's colors. "You are part of their experiment, Marcus. As am I." The revelation should have angered him, but instead Marcus found himself studying Nix's face, searching for signs of the woman he'd come to know beneath the clinical terminology of her people's research. "So what happens when the experiment ends?" "I return to Zarian Prime. They analyze my experiences, extract what they consider useful data, and then—" She paused, her skin flickering through several shades of uncertainty. "There are treatments, ways to suppress the emotional responses they consider aberrant. And you'd let them do that?" Marcus couldn't keep the disbelief from his voice. "I thought I would," Nix admitted, moving away from the window to sit across from him. "Until today. Until I felt what I now understand was jealousy over a woman I've never met from a planet I've never visited. The intensity of it terrified me, but also—" She struggled for words. "It made me realize that these emotions aren't just random chemical reactions. They're connections. When I felt jealous of Jasmine, it was because I had formed an attachment to you that transcended logic or efficiency." Marcus leaned forward, his heart racing. "What kind of attachment?" The question hung between them like a challenge. Nix's skin began to shift through a spectrum of colors he'd never seen before, deep crimsons mixed with gold, patterns that seemed to pulse with her heartbeat. "On Zarian Prime, we have a concept called soul bonding," she said quietly. "It's considered extinct, a relic from our primitive past, but the old texts describe it as a connection between two beings that transcends physical form, a recognition of compatible essences." She looked directly at him, her vulnerability raw and honest. "I believe what I feel for you is the beginning of such a bond." Marcus felt the weight of her confession settle over him like gravity. He thought of his past relationships, comfortable partnerships based on shared interests and physical attraction, but nothing that had ever felt like the electric connection he experienced with Nix. Even their professional collaboration felt charged with something deeper than mere compatibility. "I need to tell you something too," he said, reaching across the space between them to take her hands. The bioelectric energy was gentler now, warm rather than dangerous. "I broke up with Jasmine 3 years ago, before I came to Prometheus. She's married now, has a family. But that's not the important part." Nix's skin brightened with curiosity. "The important part is that what I felt for her, what I thought was love, it never made me feel like I was discovering parts of myself I didn't know existed. With you, every conversation, every shared moment of solving a problem together, it's like I'm becoming more myself than I ever was alone." The colors in Nix's skin began to settle into a warm gold pattern that seemed to pulse in rhythm with Marcus's heartbeat. "Is that what humans call love?" Marcus smiled, struck by the irony that an alien was asking him to define one of humanity's most complex emotions. "I think it might be the beginning of it, for both our species." Slowly, carefully, as if approaching a skittish animal, Marcus stood and moved closer to Nix. She rose to meet him, and for a moment they stood inches apart, two beings from different worlds trying to bridge the gap between their realities. "Your people won't approve," Marcus said softly. "Your people might not either," Nix replied. "Are you willing to find out what happens if we don't care what they think?" In response, Nix's skin burst into the most beautiful display of bioluminescence, Marcus had ever seen cascades of gold and silver that seemed to dance across her features like living art. She leaned forward and their foreheads touched in a gesture that felt both alien and intimately familiar. "Yes," she whispered, her voice carrying harmonics that resonated in his chest. "I want to find out together."